Viessa is an absolute powerhouse in the First Descendant. A lot of that has to do more so with the fact that she's extremely fun to play. And I know some of you guys might be saying, nah, it's the swimsuit, but I promise you it's not that. We're gonna be getting into my farming build as well as the interchanging bossing build. So if you guys want to use this, you can make whatever proper adjustments and tweaks to your liking. Disclaimer, this is something that I put together for my pure enjoyment. So if you decide you want to use it, that's entirely up to you. And or if you want to tweak it, that's also entirely up to you. Getting into my absolute queen build, this is going to be centered around absolute zero, which is for ultimate Viessa. But for the bossing, we have it a little bit more accessible with a different transcendence so that you can use that on both regular Viessa and of course ultimate Viessa. The main thing is that what is absolute zero doing? It is going to be changing your skills. So basically when a skill lands a critical hit, it creates a ice sphere that flies around, and 3 of them to be specific. The ice sphere that is created flies to a nearby enemy, deals damage to that hit enemy, and deals burst damage to nearby enemies on critical hit, and inflicts frostbite on the enemy. So the main thing is that every single skill is now going to be chill singular, and every single skill is going to inflict frostbite, right? So the cool thing about Viessa is that she naturally has really high damage modifiers. So you're not really too concerned with like the lack of damage, right? Like obviously you can try to scale that damage as much as you possibly can, but she's always going to hit relatively hard. What I wanted was very low cooldowns and extremely high range. What we decided to go for was number 1, focus on chill, which is giving us chill skill power. It's also giving us skill cooldown minus 6.1%. Obviously you have a couple of different flex options there. You can just go with chill specialist or you can go with chill master. Those are going to be more focused on the just power, just giving more damage. But for me, we're looking for actually lowering the skill cooldown. So that's what I decided to go with. We also using HP amp. You could argue you could use battle of stamina here, but I just wanted as much HP as I possibly could get. Battle stamina, that does give you skill duration, which could help you with making your frostbite last a little bit longer, which isn't the worst thing ever. It actually would be kind of beneficial. Decided to go for the just straight up defense. I could have went for the skill power with the defense, but I wanted to make up for the defense I would have been missing from my external components. So that's why I decided to go with the just increased defense. We're also using Glacial Sanctium. I actually will sometimes, believe it or not, will run into bosses sometimes with this build just because it's so fun. So I wanted to have something to kind of help out with, again, being that extra part to the equation, which is having resistances, crit resistance, obviously immunities for whatever boss you're fighting, etc. Right now we're using emergency measures, and we're also using skill insight, which is giving us the skill critical hit rate. And this one is giving us skill critical hit rate at a higher percentage, and then skill critical hit damage. You could obviously go, and try to add skill concentration and skill front lines. But the main thing about those things is that I'm not really necessarily trying to like hit the highest damage numbers because I'm hitting so much stuff. The main thing about this build is that I'm trying to just get a crit off, because every time I crit, it is going to proc my absolute zero. And that's one of the main things, is that the more I can crit, is essentially makes the build much better. So you could try to add front lines in here, but that also would mean you would be missing one of these other pieces to the puzzle, which I would say, have. A frugal mindset, which is giving us a skill cost reduction of 8.5%, and then a skill effect range, and this is more of a top off here, of 22.2%. We're also using skill expansion, which is giving us a skill effect range of 92.3, which is huge. And then of course, we are using, for our cooldowns, we have MP conversion. This is taking away some MP, but it doesn't really matter too much. If you're, of course, farming, there's like MP usually around that you can pick up. If you want to, you can swap one of these mods out for something like MP collector if it's really bothering you that bad. But that's all entirely up to you. In our flex spot or our open spot, I have nimble fingers here just to give us an additional 25.6% cooldown. Now I'll just kind of show you guys my overall stats. What I currently have right now, again, you can kind of alter or filter in what you need. I got 10K HP, 4K defense. Typically you want more than that if you're doing any sort of like bossing. But for most ad clearing stuff, I'm gonna be honest, nothing's really touching her. So that's kind of that. Like the radius and just throwing the blizzard, even when she uses her 4th skill, she can place that so far away from her. A lot of the times, if you have to be up super close, I don't know. I'm not gonna say you use the character wrong, but you definitely don't have to be that close with this build. The other thing is too, the ice spheres shoot pretty far, so you don't ever really have to be that close to be taking a whole bunch of incoming damage. So of course you can adjust that to whatever your liking is. I just decided to have more HP in this specific build, but that's because of the external components. It just kind of all depends what I'm doing. Like if I'm farming something a little bit harder, then I will do a broken set on that so that I'm able to have more sustain. But the main thing is that, like I said, we still have about 42% skill critical rate. We have the singular skill power boost ratio. Skill critical hit damage is fairly low. But again, the main objective with this build isn't to be hitting as hard as possible. It's actually to crit as often as possible, because then that means that we're constantly refreshing absolute zero. And we're going to have that kind of playing like defense for us in a way. It's like really cool how it works. But the main thing is essentially those values can shift or change. As far as the gun goes, we are using the Clairvoyance. Now, keep in mind, the Clairvoyance is not a powerhouse gun. It's this weird perception that every gun needs to be a powerhouse gun. This is a absolutely insane debuffing gun, okay? The main thing about this gun and why I like using it is because it allows me to have the chance to freeze enemies and the special effect. It also gives you the opportunity to potentially proc your frostbite in the absolute zero, which is huge, right? So the thing is that the thing beyond, so it says hitting an enemy with stage 2 beam inflicts void gaze on the target. Void gaze is a chill resistance of minus 20%. Now, it also goes to say that hitting an enemy with stage 3 beam inflicts appalled calling on the target. This effect is considered to be the same effect as frostbite in some modes. Now, appalled calling is not only a 20% resistance reduction, but also an action speed minus 70%. So that is something that is absolutely huge. Just for how this gun works, you put some chill on it, go crazy. Some important takeaway mods that I would say you want to make sure are up here. Slow art is going to be one of the big ones that I actually like. I know some people live by action reaction, but I'm telling you, slow art is going to be one of the best things for a beam gun or a beam rifle like Clairvoyance, because it is also reducing your fire rate. Keep in mind that lowering fire rate on these types of guns is actually beneficial because it allows you to be able to shoot for longer periods of time. The bullet count on the Clairvoyance and other beam guns, I would even argue, if you are trying to, work that out, are not exactly like your typical regular guns. It's very, very different. So that's one thing I'll cover a little bit more in the Clairvoyance build video to kind of like emphasize and explain that. What we also have is edging shot. So we got a little bit of crit rate here, but again, firearm attack is going to be going down slightly, but that's okay because we're not using this gun really just for pure damage. We do have refrigerate gun barrels. So this is a chill attack plus 80% with some more fire rate reduction here. We have an increased magazine so that we can have the opportunity to have more bullets to go towards the slower fire rate, which is going to allow us to be able to shoot much longer. And then of course we're using mental focus. So when we're firing a firearm, the fire rate will go up for 2 seconds, and it's up to 60 stacks. So again, even though we have this reduction here on the firearm attack minus 15%, we'll make up for it as this builds and starts going up in stacks. And then this effect will only be removed when reloading or changing your firearm, which is huge, right? So these are just some of the starter ones that I would say you just want to kind of have. I'm, again, not done with this gun, but for even where it's at, it's just been an extremely fun gun to use with this build. Just farming. As far as the pros and cons for this build, I would say the pros is one that you get to just hit everything. The radius that Viessa has in this build is actually really insane. On top of that, you also have the ability to spam your abilities. I think that that's another thing that actually ends up being a huge pro because you're able to get off abilities really quick. And this is really effective if you're running outpost or if you're doing Kuiper farming or if you're even just running through stages or missions and you're just trying to get through things as quickly as possible. The other thing is too, and it's something that I didn't note, but things like her third skill or her blizzard can actually go through things. So I use her third skill quite a bit just to go through walls, go through platforms. It's such a good ability. And because of the radius increase, it actually allows it to say, for example, you're at the bottom of a staircase. It can still hit things a staircase above you, which is pretty insane. Now, of course, we got to mention some cons. I would definitely say some of the cons to this build is that this is by no means a build that you really want to take into bossing. The main thing is I feel like you're just going to be kind of subpar in the overall potential damage that she could really actually do in a bossing fight. She can do some of the earlier hard bosses in this build, but I wouldn't recommend taking her in this specific build into any of the things past like maybe Frostwalker. I wouldn't even go into Frostwalker with this build at all, just because simply put, she's not going to be offering you enough damage for what her true damage potential really is. And so you don't want to go in there setting yourself up for, I would say, failure, right? The other thing that I would say is a big con is because of the fact that you have all of this skill expansion, you're not really focused on too much of the frostbite or the duration, I should say, of it. So I guess that is a downside to this build. If you want to focus more on that, then you would have to cut back more on either the expansion or on the cooldown, but that would be more so of a preference thing. All right, so that's basically that. For our bossing build, this is going to be opening up for regular Viessa. Obviously, you can use this for ultimate Viessa as well. But what I decided to go for, the cold-bloodedness is what I actually liked. What cold-bloodedness is changing and what it's allowing you to be able to do is it's actually changing your skill 2. So normally in your skill 2, you would actually be getting the Frost Road, which is that continuous damage ice path that you leave behind. And then as well as a movement speed increase. And I think like shield recovery. But what you're actually alternating that out for is now you have a skill power increase of 5%, you have an MP cost decrease of 20%, and a cooldown reduction rate of 20% as well. So this is allowing us to lay off some of those mods for that from like in the first build while still being able to lay down some pretty solid damage. Again, we're still emphasizing skill 4, but the main thing that changes is that now you're not dealing with all singular abilities, and that's why I isolated skill 4 to be the main thing I want to do, which is going to be a chill tech ability, okay? Now, with that, we have Focus on Chill. Focus on Chill obviously is going to be the big thing here because it's still going to be giving us, that cooldown as well as allowing us to be able to still have some of that raw skill power for Chill. But again, you can use Chill Master. You can use Chill Specialist. It just really all depends on what you prefer. Now, HP Amplification, again, you could swap that out for regular HP, but we're just trying to get as much HP value as we possibly can get. Now, we do lose some shield, but yeah, it is what it is. I don't really care too much about that. You can mitigate that if you choose to, so just kind of keeping that in mind. But for right now, it's cool. Now, what we are using here is Spear and Shield. Spear and Shield is great because this is giving us a skill power increase as well as the defense. We have about 20,000 defense, 11k HP in this build, which is one of the big things here. So we have some pretty solid sustain. If you need more defense, your build would definitely change just a little bit. You would definitely want to use this second like R slot here, and that's so that you can put like regular defense. It would take you probably to about like 37k if you use like the increased defense slot. But what I wanted to keep was the build open so that you can still run your resistances for like immunities or just for debuffs that you might have to face poison or toxic or electrocution, etc. We'll talk about that. Talk about that in a second. But we are running emergency measures, front lines, which and then also skill insight, which is going to be giving us our skill critical hit rate and skill critical hit damage. Again, going and emphasizing, I like and prefer critting more often than, just trying to do more crit damage when I do crit. So that's what I had tried to execute here. I think it puts us at about 46% skill critical rate. Now, of course, with that, we're also using a Technician, which gives us the skill power modifier of 50.8% in this slot under our attack module, okay, for this. Now, the other thing is that we are also using multi-talented. Keep in mind, multi-talented is going to vary based off of whatever skill you decide to use first. Because we are using the Blizzard first, the tech active skill, so the skill range and power modifier of this is going to be increased by 15% for 5 seconds. So that's what I was trying to take advantage of, just scaling the damage overall. So again, you can use multi-talented in many of different builds. Even if you want to use it in absolute zero, you technically could, right? It would still work, but it would just give you the singular active skill, which is all attribute damage plus 30%. But again, it just all depends on what skill. So just kind of being mindful of that, what skill is being proc first, right? Now, lastly, in the last slot here, we have our open slot, which is going to be for heat antibody. Again, it's going to be any of the antibodies. So it doesn't necessarily have to be heat antibody. It could be, anything, right? So it could be for toxic. It could be for cold. It can be for electric. This is just to keep the build open so that you can fight off or deal with any resistances that you need to. And then as well as, again, using the immunity ones, for example, bird immunity with fire resistance, or perfect anti-venom with the poison immunity and toxic resistance, right? So this is to keep you open so that you can use these. But again, if you decide that you don't want these, then what you could also do, for example, you could slap like, say, defense in here in this slot. And I'll show you like one of my alternative builds that I actually like to use. So if we're not really too caring, if you're not really too concerned, I should say, with any of the extra, what you could do is increase defense there. And then another thing that, and let me see, so it's chill. There we go. So Glacial Sanctum here. We would actually swap out this and we would go with Glacial Sanctum here, right? So that would be giving you that critical hit resistance of plus 15.1%, and then chill skill power, that extra that you would be missing. And then if we go here under the Malachite, there's one mod that you could also add here, and this would be if you care about any excess like cooldowns or skill costs, which it then will give you a skill effect range increase. You could go for this, right? And that would still work. But again, I still prefer the first one just because it allows you to have the antibody, which is, again, a really big thing as we get deeper into the game, being able to sustain longer and last longer in the fight, where you're also still doing really solid damage. As far as our external component, the main thing that's going to be changing is it's going to be chill and tech is what you're aiming for. And then for the substats that you're going to be looking for, I would say anything with additional skill damage to Colossus, as well as skill critical hit damage. That's probably going to be some of your better ones for this specific build, so that you're able to get more damage off, hit harder, and of course do more damage to those bosses. As far as the external components go, the main thing is that what I decided to do was do a broken set. We're not really too worried about the 4 set for the Frostbite because it doesn't give us enough value to be able to sustain well enough for these longer fights and just really for bossing, in my opinion. Now, again, what we are aiming for here, we have the double chill and then we have double duration. We have right here chill resistance with max MP. Again, that's going to vary. You're going to have to farm different pieces for different resistances, but max MP is a huge one for her so that she can have MP to pull from to do her abilities. We, of course, have max HP with HP on this one. We have defense on this one with max HP, which is the big thing, and it's a gold defense, which is huge. And then, of course, we have here shield recovery modifier so that she's able to get that back. Because keep in mind, the shield, it gets crapped on quite a bit, but people don't realize that the shield is actually a defensive layer for your HP. So the quicker you're able to get that back, that also could be beneficial. And that's why there are certain values on certain external components that aren't directly like defense, because there are stats, for example, shield recovery modifier, that would allow you to give you back your defensive layer much quicker, even though you might have gotten hit and lost it. So the quicker you can get that back, the quicker you can use it again to be that defensive layer, right? So again, skill duration, chill power is kind of what we aim for here. Just to kind of revisit the stats, I'll show you guys that again. HP value, 11K, 20K defense. Again, if we swap in that extra defense mod and kind of move things around like I showed you, you can get this to about 37K. What we have on skill critical rate, we have 46%. And then we have about a 2.3% modifier on the skill crit damage. But keep in mind that if you adjust or change the reactor and you go for additional damage for Colossus, or you go for the skill critical hit damage, that's also going to change that number significantly so you can do more. To touch on the weapon for this build really briefly, it's going to be your preference. I feel like for bossing, I use what I prefer. I use hand cannons quite a bit, so Nezestra, Prefetor might be one for you guys. I will say some recommendations. Enduring Legacy is a great gun on her. I definitely would say also the Afterglow is another good gun on like most units, just because it can hit so freaking hard. So that will change your mounted weapon, but you ultimately can decide based off of that what you want to go for. But I would definitely say for bossing, you got to decide what your role is, and then that can then just determine what guns you might want to bring, right? So depending on the build, that can also vary, but that's the big thing. Now, as far as our pros and cons, I want to get into our pros first, with the pros being that number one, you do more damage. Obviously, more damage than your farming build in this scenario. It's allowing you to hit higher numbers, which is going to make it more effective for being a contributing factor to your team comp. Or even if you're trying to solo bosses, it's not so bad. I mean, you do have to play a little bit more. I'm not going to sell this to you as a one-shot, like just kills all bosses and decimates them thing, but it is still usable to solo bosses. That's kind of the cool thing about the build, right? The other thing is too, is that your cost and your MP is being reduced. The one thing you do have to remember though, is you have to constantly proc your skill 2 first, because if you don't, then you're not getting those additional values. The other thing is too, is that you are getting that raw skill power increase. So that's also going to be a contributing factor and needs to be proc to add more damage value when you are using your other abilities from your skill 1, skill 3, and even your skill 4. Now, as far as cons, I would say the biggest con is that, again, this isn't the highest damage output build, and I'm not going to sell it to you as that either. This is just a build that I prefer to use and that I had fun still using within the confines of the sockets that I had moduled already for my farming build that I had made for Viessa. I would definitely say that there are much better damages that you can get, or I would even say more damage that you could even get when you're talking about a bossing Viessa. The other thing is too, is that when you're also looking at the fact that you have to constantly proc skill 2 first, if you don't proc that, then you're losing value. So that's another con, is that you have to constantly be reprocking skill 2. And this means that you need to have a good mana pool to pull from. So MP, max MP is going to be necessary on your external components, because otherwise you're not going to have enough MP to constantly pull from, especially if you forget a rotation or two to utilize that second skill. I appreciate you guys for watching all the way through up until this point, and if you would like, definitely like and subscribe to the channel. Now, of course, guys, this was a personal preference build. This is just something I wanted to do that was fun, not quote unquote following meta, that allowed me to be able to utilize this unit in the way that I was going to be able to get the most enjoyment. So hopefully you guys can tweak this, make this something that you enjoy as well. But that's going to be basically that, guys. Everyone stay blessed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.